Hello everybody and a very warm welcome to the 2020 Cundill History Prize winner ceremony. This is the one we've all been waiting for. Wherever you are in the world, this is a very innovative, exciting, COVID-proof ceremony we're having here. My name's Dan Snow. I'm the host of HistoryHit. I'm extremely privileged to be working as a partner for the leading international history event of the year. And we're going to help bring this event to you. For more about HistoryHit, check this out. So we're now live on the Cundill History Prize YouTube channel. It is my enormous pleasure to welcome three phenomenal historians, the 2020 Cundill History Prize finalists. We've got Vincent Brown joining us from Cambridge, Massachusetts. Hi, Vincent. We got William Dalrymple, currently very on brand, near Lake Como in Italy. Hello, William. And we've got Camilla Townsend from New Brunswick, New Jersey. Hi, Camilla. Congratulations to all the finalists making this far. Best of luck to you all. I have read all of these books and I am extremely happy that I was not a juror on this. I'll tell you, it's impossible to choose. I'd also like to welcome Peter Frankopan, 2020 chair of the jury, live from his headquarters in Oxford. Hi, Peter. And from Montreal, we've got Antonia Maioni, Dean of the Faculty of Arts at Mcgill University. I don't sound like it, but I am half Canadian, and all of my family went to Mcgill. I'm a big disappointment to everybody. Mcgill administers the Cundill History Prize. So hello to you all. We might not be able to gather together in Montreal this year, but we are keeping the home of the Cundill History Prize with us throughout the ceremony. We're all virtually in Montreal, that's for sure. And so from Montreal, that wonderful city, we have a very special welcome from Suzanne Fortier. She's the principal, she's the vice chancellor of Mcgill University.
Thank you, Dan. Welcome everyone and hello from Montreal. Bonjour et merci de vous joindre à nous. Mcgill University has been proud to host the Cundill History Prize for the past 13 years. We began hosting in 2008 when alumnus Peter Cundill endowed what has become the world's leading international history prize. Under normal circumstances, we would be getting together in the beautiful Musée des Beaux-Arts de Montréal to hear the winner announced. This year is certainly different. The global pandemic is challenging us to adapt and make history in our own way with the first ever virtual Cundill History Prize season. Cela dit, alors que la pandémie nous éloigne les uns des autres, des initiatives telles que ce prix de littérature historique donnent lieu à de formidables rapprochements. I'm delighted to see the Cundill History Prize welcome such a rich and diverse audience this year. As the prize continues to champion history with broad appeal, it is rewarding to have the public so engaged and excited. It is equally rewarding to see our three finalists explore histories which are relevant to issues that our global community faces today. Here at Mcgill, we recognize that scholarship transcends borders, So it is fitting that the Kundil Prize be open to books and authors from anywhere in the world. The continued success of the Kundil History Prize rests upon the shoulders of many alumni, friends, and supporters. In particular, I want to recognize the Peter Kundil Foundation and the Advisory Committee. My thanks to all of you. Et encore une fois, merci à vous tous d'être présents ici ce soir. De la part de Mcgill et du comité organisateur du prix Kundil, je vous souhaite une excellente cérémonie. And to our 3 finalists, congratulations. Thank you for 3 remarkable books, and good luck from all of us at Mcgill.
Well, thank you so much, Suzanne, Principal Fortier. We're staying in that wonderful city of Montreal now. We're going to talk to Antonia Maioni, Dean of Faculty of Arts at Mcgill University. Antonia, this is actually a culmination of a whole program of virtual events. It's the inaugural Cundill History Prize Festival. Give us a flavor. How's it all been going? I think, Antonia, you might still be on mute. I've got to unmute you. It's de rigueur for these Zoom events.
Thank you so much, Dan. It has been a wonderful year. It's been a virtual year, our first ever, of course, because of the situation that we find ourselves in through the pandemic. But I have to say that the virtual nature of the Kundil Prize for 2020 has not diluted at all the excitement and the interest and the excellence of all of the books that we celebrate. And of course, the great history that is behind those books and those authors as well. The Kundil Festival is really the culmination of the year's events. It's yesterday and today. And I just want to highlight that today is the third in a trifecta of wonderful events. Yesterday, the Kundil Lecture was delivered by last year's winner, Julia Lovell, for her wonderful book on Maoism, A Global History. And yesterday as well, we had a terrific Kundil Forum, which included the 3 finalists who are with us today, Vincent Brown, William Dalrymple, and Camilla Townsend, on the question of the meaning of monuments and the whole idea of how we commemorate in our cultures. It was a fascinating journey led by our very own Catherine Deborah of Mcgill University. So I want to also highlight that, again, this festival is something that I see as continuing into the future. I'm so happy that we're able to make it happen this year virtually. And I want to thank all of our participants, all of our jury members, and of course, the finalists for having been part of that. Thank you.
Completely, Antonia, completely agree there. And the festival sounds brilliant so far. So congratulations for putting that on under extremely difficult circumstances this year. All of those events you just heard about, including this one, and all of the shortlist and finalist announcements of the 2020 prize can all be rewatched. You just head over to cundillprize.com to do that. Now, as if there wasn't enough luminaries around already, the jury for this year's prize, joining Peter Frankopan, were astonishing historians in their own rights as well, and broadcasters. We've got Anne Applebaum, Senior Fellow at Johns Hopkins University, staff writer at The Atlantic and award-winning author. Lyse Doucet, Chief International Correspondent and a Senior Presenter for the BBC. A Professor of History at the University of New Hampshire, Elijah Gould. And Sujit Sivasundaram, Professor of World History at Cambridge University and Director of the university's Centre of South Asian Studies. So let's come to Peter Frankopan, who your job was to try and get a decision out of all those wonderful people. 2020 wasn't a normal year for you, was it, Peter? How was it, doing all this remotely?
Well, I guess there were pluses and minuses. The big pluses was that we got all the books delivered in one go on a Kindle. The minuses were we didn't get a chance to meet in person, which is a shame because there were, as you said, a stellar jury. And it's important, I think, in the process of talking about history to be able to chat as well as to discuss. So this kind of post-meeting catch-ups didn't happen. But on the other hand, we had meetings online where Lyse Doucet dialed in from Kabul, Anne Applebaum was in Poland, Elijah Gould was in New Hampshire, and Sujit Sivasundaram was in Cambridge. So the fact that we could connect globally was something. And I think in this year where we've all been stuck at home for so long, having the comfort of lots of books to read and outstanding books, means that there's been a lot more positives than negatives. But I think, like everybody in the world, we've been having to learn how to do things differently. My own real regret is that we're not all in Mcgill this evening with a big gala dinner to celebrate these three unbelievably special historians and the extraordinary books that they've written. But the whole process has been a pleasure from start to finish, even though slightly unusual.
Absolutely, I can confirm. I've talked to Peter a fair bit this year. I can confirm how much he has enjoyed this process. So thank you very much, Peter. We're going to come back to you in a little bit. You can announce the winner, of course. Whew. Now let's take a closer look at the three finalists that the jurors have chosen. So here are Anne, Lyse, Eliga, and Sujit on Vincent Browne's Tacky's Revolt.
So history is famously written by the winners, and it's also written by the people with access to pen and paper and the technology to use it. The main actors in Browne's stories, some of them are, of course, colonial officials, but he also tells the story from the standpoint of people like Tacky, who led the revolt, who were not literate, who did not leave surviving records, and were, of course, not winners. And by using digital sources, by reading between the lines of the written sources that survive, he's able to bring the reader into the mindsets, into the imaginative world of Tacky and the revolt's leaders, and let us see how this looked to them. It's really, it's a new perspective, and it's hugely important perspective, again, both for professional historians and for the general reader.
This is a masterful use of cartography to connect the dots, to connect the people and places on our geographic and mental maps, to broaden and deepen our understanding of the links between an African, a European, and an American history that is being re-examined and reflected upon with even greater urgency today. And in looking at the individuals on all sides who made this history, we meet Tacky and Apongo and Simon, as well as women like Mary and Aqua, individuals who played crucial roles in this crucial sweep of history.
On a vitally important topic, the history of enslavement, this book provides the reader with perfectly judged analysis and vivid detail. This book moves between West Africa and the Caribbean, between the micro and the macro, between military history and commercial and diasporic history with ease. In this sense, it gives us a sweep of history, whilst also keeping a focus on particular events, such as Tacky's Revolt.
If you pick up this book thinking that you're just reading about a slave rebellion in Jamaica, you will miss what's really extraordinary about this story. This is a book that integrates the history of warfare in West Africa, the history of British attitudes to colonialism and to slavery. It brings together stories from all over the world and uses them to explain this one series of events. And it shows the events from perspectives that we aren't used to seeing. It will make you think differently about the history of slavery, about the history of colonialism, and even about the history of Africa.
Glowing praise there from the jury. Vincent, I want to come to you. Congratulations, obviously, for making it this far. What does it mean? What's it like being a finalist for the Cundill History Prize 2020?
Oh, well, it's obviously a great honor. I mean, most just to be in consideration with all these fantastic historians, the long list, the short list, and now these two incredible finalists. So I'm just really honored, and I'm really pleased with the way that the Cundill Prize has handled the publicity around these books. I think it's really great for history, kind of making people aware that there is great history out there that makes good literature.
Well, there's certainly a lot of both of those in your book. I mean, what was it about this extraordinary story that made you embark on a journey of research that you've told me in the past is years?
Well, I mean, because we don't necessarily consider slave revolt as war, certainly not as war with empires. And it really kind of occurred to me that one needed to see slave revolt from the perspective of the enslaved, to really think about what they were up against and how they thought they might be able to challenge so great an institution as the British Empire in the mid-18th century. And for that, I needed to really go back and look at the history of these slave rebels in Jamaica from Africa, and trace out their journeys across the Atlantic to Jamaica, and then think about them as really part of that larger world of Atlantic warfare in the 18th century.
And we've talked before, and people watching this are going to get a chance to just hear just extraordinary lengths you had to go to try and make sure that the voices of those enslaved people were heard. You'll be hearing more about that in a sec. What do you want people to take away from reading this book?
Well, one of the things I'd most like them to learn is that despite the horrors of slavery, the brutality of slavery, Black people, enslaved people always fought back. And they fought back in sometimes effective and surprising and creative ways, adapting to their circumstances, drawing on what they had known, and responding to their predicament in ways that I think should astound us, but also in some ways inspire us.
Absolutely. Well, thank you very much indeed, and good luck to you. Next up, we're going to hear what the jurors made of William Dalrymple's book on the anarchy. Let's take a look.
We know the history of the East India Company more or less, and how it occupied India and how it extracted wealth from India and brought it to Britain. But what William Dalrymple does is he makes that story come alive again and reminds us exactly how many people in Britain were involved in the company, how present the company was in British politics at the time. And he implicitly forces us to compare the actions of that company with the actions of other companies in the modern world that also haven't taken responsibility for the impact that they've had on people's lives. It's a book that, in illuminating a piece of the past, forces us to reflect on the present.
The story of the rise of the East India Company in South Asia has seen a fantastic wave of scholarship in recent years, and the signal achievement of William Dalrymple in The Anarchy is to take this scholarship to a wide public audience. He provides the reader with an absorbing portrait of late early modern South Asia in the midst of civil war and violence of all kinds. But it is the East India Company which dominates this book, and it is the vehicle of supreme anarchy in South Asia.
As I read The Anarchy, I was just blown away by Dalrymple's literary skills. This guy can write. He captures the settings, the sounds, the smells of the Deccan, of the Ganges River Delta, of Bengal. He brings us inside the imaginative world of the principal actors, the Mughal emperors, the Mughal and then the British Nawabs. He brings us onto the spot, again, in ways that are really hard to do. The best writers can do it, and Dalrymple certainly can. And that alone is going to make this a book that is read time and time again, passed on. It's going to have a huge impact.
This big book lands on our desks and in our laps just when stories of big business and the abuses of empire are making headlines today. Just when we're all reflecting on the risks and repercussions of the global tech giants, of the companies we say are too big to fail, along comes this evocative page-turner about a corporation centuries ago which grew to dominate half of the world's trade. In Dalrymple's telling, it's a story of powerful personalities, of corporate greed, and also of political collusion. In his words, it's a story of calculated and deliberate amnesia. Well, we live in a time now that so many of us are no longer willing to forget a history whose consequences we live with to this day.
Well, that was what the jurors made of William Dalrymple's book. William is with us. He's looking a bit chilly there, William, wrapped in a blanket, but I have no sympathy for you because you've had a pretty good year. Barack Obama featured you on his reading list for last year. You're in Lake Como, and now you're a finalist in the Cundill History Prize. So how are you feeling? Pretty good?
It's been a surprisingly good year. I'm still not entirely sure what I'm doing in this very distinguished company. It's been a huge pleasure and an honor to be with Camilla and Vincent. And if it stops here, it's been a good ride. I think one thing I noticed this morning that we're all roughly the same age, and the books that we're up with at the moment are not just books that we've worked on in the last year or two. They are projects that we've all been at for about 2 decades, and the culmination, in a sense, I think, for all of us, of a great deal of work. So it's all the greater honor to be here with them and with their amazing projects coming to fruition.
The story of the East India Company feels so important at this particular moment in time. Is that something you're aware of as you're writing the history?
Well, I think there are 2 important things to take away from this. One is that, particularly in Britain, there is this sort of ridiculous nostalgia for empire. We know that the German empires were horrible, that the Belgian empires were worse, that the French were awful. But somehow the British love to believe that their empire was some sort of wonderful merchant ivory film rolled out across the plains of Asia with ladies in crinoline dresses floating over club lawns, drinking gin fizzes and sort of playing croquet with smiling elephants, or variants of that sort of setup. And so I think, to stress quite how exploitative and extractive empire was is very important in Britain. But I think also at the moment, when we're worried about corporations, to show how empire can be something that's corporate, not necessarily coming out of the state, but coming out of a corporation, is also important in this age of surveillance capitalism. I mean, the East India Company is sort of, Google with nuclear weapons, or Facebook with fighter jets, if you like. That's the kind of world we're entering into.
Man, look, he's sipping his glass of wine. Now, don't worry, William. You'll be you'll let you know soon. It's the prize giving is moments away now, buddy. Right, let's hear what the jurors made of The Fifth Son by Camilla Townsend.
The Fifth Son is a magical book. It's one of those books, when you're reading it, you sometimes put it down and pause for a moment to absorb the beauty of the words and the imagery. It takes you back to a different place in time, and in this case, in the 16th century. And I was also taken by the idea that the Aztecs are traditional storytellers, but they wouldn't recognize themselves in the stories written by others, in this case, the Spanish text. Rather than the history, they wrote themselves in their own language. So this is history at its best, taking us back to a history we thought that we knew and understood, but now realize through books like this that we're only beginning to scratch the surface. This is not just a retelling of history, it changes history.
One of the things that Camilla Townsend does very effectively is use stories and descriptions of individual incidents from the distant past in order to illuminate broader themes. So whether it's the story of an Aztec princess and why she wanted to sacrifice herself and how she uses that to illustrate the morality of Aztec culture, or whether it's the story of Malinche, who was Cortez's native guide, and what motivated her and why she helped Cortez organize the conquest. These individual instances make real a piece of history that would otherwise seem very distant and alien to us.
For a book like Camilla Townsend's, which captures what the Spanish conquest of Mexico meant to the Nahuatl-speaking inhabitants of the Aztec Empire, in order to capture that from their perspective, you have to do research in the Nahuatl language, and that's really hard to do. It's particularly hard to do because that's a skill that is only taught in a select few places. Usually you have to have gone to an elite school to acquire the knowledge. And Townsend has that, but instead of using it as a barrier to readers or something to sort of be proud of, she uses it to bring us in, to show us what life was like, to get us into the mindset of the Aztec Empire's native inhabitants.
The Fifth Son will present the reader with a fascinating, enlightening, and entertaining read, which speaks to some key dilemmas that face any scholar and student of history: how to analyze and come to terms with cultural conquest on a scale unmatched perhaps in the history of the world. The reader will finish The Fifth Son entertained, enlightened, and wanting to know more about this history of cultural conquest and imperialism.
So that was the jurors talking about Fifth Son. As you can hear, all of the jurors think all three books are pretty unbelievable. And it was a very, very difficult decision to make, clearly. I'm joined by Camilla Townsend now. Camilla, I thought it was very interesting what William said. And he's absolutely right. For all of you, when I've talked to you individually, you've all said this is the product of years, perhaps even decades of work. You've had to learn the language. When did you know that this was a story that you were really going to tell?
Well, I started to study Nahuatl, the Aztec language, back in the 90s, but I can't say that it was because I knew this was a story I wanted to tell. You remember those days before the internet when we heard about things via memos? I got a memo that there was going to be a special course on the Nahuatl language, and I went to take it. And then little by little, I realized I could do this. And then little by little, I realized how many sources exist, how much the native peoples wrote in their own language in the 1500s. So it was actually only about 10 years ago that I realized I ought to try to write the history as they had told it to themselves, to their children, to their grandchildren, and put that in a book. It was the language and the sources that came to me before the idea for the book, in fact. It's unusual biography of a project, really.
When you're writing, presumably you're thinking about the text, the sources. You might think about anyone, the readers perhaps, but do you think about winning prizes like the Kundil Prize? I mean, what does that mean to you as an author, historian?
I can genuinely say it never occurred to me that I would find myself here in this august company. I was writing this book out of joy and out of love of the language, the people that I was meeting in these sources. These were stories that hadn't been told or had been told only from the Spanish perspective, which gave it quite a different angle. I just realized that I wanted to tell the story as they had told it. And then I began to have fun doing that, as I think they did. These Indigenous writers had quite a sense of humor, as did their audiences. So I sort of got with the flow and started to write. And over the course of a number of summers, in between the courses I was teaching, realized this was a book I could finish. This was a book I could do. I never would have dreamed that this book would be up for the Cundill Prize. But for the sake of the Indigenous writers who wrote those sources, I am glad that it is.
Well, and we're very glad they wrote those sources, and then we're very glad that you were on hand to synthesize them all for us. So thank you very much and good luck. Thank you all, in fact, Vincent, William, and Camilla. It's been fantastic to have you here with us today to hear about your work. And thank you for producing 3 outstanding works of history. It's almost time to bring Peter Frankopan back in to announce the winner. But before I do, let's take a moment to reflect on the man who founded the Cundill History Prize and make all this possible in the first place. Peter Kundil.
This is a very special day for me and for all of us at the Peter Cundill Foundation. This prize was so unbelievably important to Peter. In the early years, we were both still at Mackenzie. He would send a fax outlining the authors, the topics, the work that had been done, as well as sharing his excitement as we moved towards the winning announcement. He had such a passionate belief in history, not only in how it helped us better understand today, but in how it would shape the future. But admittedly, history wasn't always Peter's greatest area of expertise, and Michael Meehan can explain that better than most.
Well, Peter and I were taking the same history course, and we were coming up to exam time. I don't think Peter had focused really on that fact. He had other interests, other fish to fry. When the exam results came out, he unfortunately had failed and was required to write a supplementary examination in the fall. He went to see the professor and told me privately afterwards that he had shed a tear or two, but the professor was totally unmoved, not surprisingly, and refused to change the mark. So instead of backpacking around Europe, which is what Peter had planned, He ended up spending the summer in Montreal painting a wrought iron fence along McGill University property on Sherbrooke Street. Quite a come down from what he thought his summer was going to be like.
Investing was the core of what Peter loved to do. And I think almost everything else he did was interwoven with some aspect of investing. Clearly, he loved his family and friends, and they were the most important part of his life. But he made sure that he did things every year. For instance, he did something that would scare him, and he made sure he went to a new country every year. And I think a lot of this was driven by his constantly seeking investment ideas and investment thoughts. Investing wasn't so much a job for Peter. It was something he did every moment, I think, of every day.
He always tried every year to take up a new challenge. It might be hang gliding, it might be marathon running, it might be handball. He did them all. He loved the competition because he was a competitive person and always wanted to excel.
He worked when he was in the office, he worked when he was home, he worked when he was traveling, but he was also very balanced about life and wanting to have a good time. Peter, at a party, whether it be a dinner party or some larger gathering, very often the life of the party, someone of great interest to people in the early days would take great joy in showing up in a costume or some sort of other aspect of disguise. The Kundil History Prize was extremely important to Peter, and it's also extremely important to the Peter Kundil Foundation and where we are today. And one of the reasons for that is that Peter made this decision while he was alive, working with Michael Meehan and working with the people at McGill, to something he truly believed in and something he felt was important.
During his lifetime, he did not like to make long-term commitments such as endowments. In fact, he didn't like endowments at all. But he did make an exception for the History Prize because he valued it so much and he so desperately wanted to see it put into place before his health got too badly affected. And very proud to bring to a worldwide audience history that is of world-class status. We are proud of the writing that the prize supports. We're proud of all our contestants and prize winners, and we hope that you'll stay with us in years to come, old friends and new friends. But now, I think it's a moment to hear what we've been waiting for throughout this. And that, of course, is the name of the 2020 Cundill History Prize winner.
A wonderful tribute there to Peter Kundil, the man who founded the History Prize that we're all here today to celebrate. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Peter Frankopan, a man who had the huge privilege, but also slightly unenviable job of being the chair of the jury for the 2020 Cundill History Prize. And he is now here to announce the winner.
Thank you, Dan. Well, before I do that, I'd like a groom at a wedding, I should first of all start with an extensive list of thanks. So in the first instance, huge thanks to the Cundill Foundation, to Peter Cundill and his friends for this incredibly generous bequest that allows the prize to function. It's such an important thing for historians all around the world to have such a visible and such a generous prize and to bring what we do to a wider audience. So incredibly grateful to you for that. Thank you again for your support this year and for letting this happen. Second to Antonia Maioni and everybody at Mcgill for making this happen, particularly Mackenzie Bleho, who's managed to keep us all on the straight and narrow the whole way through a process, triangulating us all. The logistics matter with a competition like this in any year, but particularly when we're all locked down. Thank you also to others who play such an important role behind the scenes, Kit Van Tulliken, Fiona McMorrow, Daniel Cram, for keeping us going, and everyone who's produced these extraordinary videos that look absolutely fantastic as well. Thanks also to all the historians whose books that we read. You know, each one carries years, decades of work, blood, sweat, and tears, and dreams as they come out. It really is a privilege to read all of these. And as Dan said, it's not easy to compare apples and pears. It's even harder to compare apples and, well, let's say maple syrup, to choose between all of these. But thank you to the authors and historians who keep writing, and to the publishers who commission and publish and stand behind them. Again, the visibility of this prize, I think, plays a role in keeping really good quality nonfiction being produced, and particularly history. So thank you too, and thank you for all the media coverage that this prize gets. Again, that's such an important part of encouraging young people to read and to become the next generation of historians. The final thanks, apart from to the readers of the books and the people who are watching this evening, are to my fellow jury, Lyse Doucet, Anne Applebaum, Eliga Gould, and Sujit Sivasundaram. They're all incredibly busy. They're all immensely distinguished, and they all have absolutely brilliant minds. It's been a real pleasure comparing notes about how we think about the past with such a great jury. So thank them all, above all, for their time. I'm really speaking not on my own behalf, but on behalf of all five of us this evening. For technical reasons, you have to pick one, and I'm afraid I have the honor to do so. So 2020 has been a terrible year for, I think, everybody around the world, for all the obvious reasons, but it hasn't been a bad year for history writing. The crop that was produced in the harvest this year was extraordinary in its range and variety. Some of the books we read explained to us the lives and lots of, and power also, of Viking women. We were taken up to the Bering Straits for environmental histories. We looked at Lakota America, a part of the world that is often completely ignored. We looked at the life of J.M. Keynes, the US Civil War and the role it played in the Constitution, and even, as if we hadn't had enough of it, what pandemic looked like this time in Florence in the early modern period. All of the books that made it onto the long list, and in fact even beyond, they were nuanced, they were complex, they tackled difficult themes, often with extreme technical skills around methodology, around languages, and around presenting these stories in a way that was readable. One of the things about the Cundill Prize is to make really fine history reach wide audiences. And that, as anybody who's written books that have been shortlisted, longlisted, or entered the Cundill Prize knows, is a lot harder to do than it might sound. We had a glittering shortlist, which included a magisterial overview of the last couple of hundred years of Greece by Roddy Beaton, a crisp and elegant review of the rise and fall of Cromwell and the Protectorate by Paul Lay. We had 100 years of the history of Palestine told through the eyes of a family that witnessed it by Rashid Khalidi. We had 700 years of looking at how Persia and its language and its culture influenced India by Richard Eaton. Kim Gattas in Black Wave took us through the seminal importance of the revolutions of 1979 in Iran and in Saudi Arabia. Black Radical by Kerry Greenridge, a sparkling and remarkable biography of the life of William Monroe Trotter. And then Unworthy Republic, Claudio Saunt's breathtaking and very moving account of the role of the American frontier in the 19th century. I learned an enormous amount from these books, and I suppose the mark of really good history, I felt that I learned an enormous amount about things that not only I didn't know about, but that I should know about, introducing me to things that I realized I'd spent my life in darkness. So thank you to all of those for your histories. The final three were difficult to pick and difficult to choose between. Tacky's Revolt by Vincent Brown, The Anarchy by William Dalrymple, and Fifth Son by Camilla Townsend make up a pretty fantastic trilogy, not just on their own, but put together. Each of them reads like a thriller, piecing together histories that are important, remarkable, and significant, and retelling us about how we should think about the past as a whole. So it's an enormous congratulations to all three for getting to this stage. And all three, as it happens, tell us about the other sides of history. Fifth Son tells us about how we should look at history through the eyes of the Aztecs, of the indigenous people of the Americas, rather than through the eyes of the conquerors. Tacky's Revolt likewise tells us how we should be thinking not just about slavery, but about experiences and lives of those caught up, trying to do something about demanding equality through not just a triangle of Europe, the Americas, and Africa, but involving the Caribbean too, in these four geographical zones so expertly tied together by Vincent Brown. And then The Anarchy, about the East India Company, opens up with the first sentence telling us that one of the first words from Hindi into the English language was the word loot, which tells you, I think, something very important about the motivations of Europeans as they discovered other parts of the world. So all these three books in different ways were about oppression, contemporary oppression, but also about the oppression of history, about how important it is to look at things from different perspectives and in different ways. They tell us all about the importance of greed as a motivator for human activity and the importance of listening to the voices of those who fight for equality. And I think that's a very important theme that these three books all touch on in different ways for where we are in 2020 for all sorts of different reasons. This has been a year where, through Black Lives Matters, through the economic inequalities and the medical inequalities that we've had around the world, it's important to be reminded about past examples. So it's been a real privilege to read all of these books. As I say, I've not just learned a lot, I've enjoyed the process enormously. I know that my other jurors have done as well. It's been a pleasure talking to them without a single argument or crossword. Such a wonderful experience. So a real sadness for us that it comes to an end this evening, but thank them again for their support. I'm speaking now to give without in the absence of a drum roll or tapped glass, the winner of this year's Cundill Prize as chair of the jury, and on behalf of the Cundill Foundation, I'm delighted to say is Fifth Son by Camilla Townsend.
I am speechless. I thank you. I thought I knew with certainty that it couldn't. I didn't think it was possible. My goodness. I thank you all so very much. I feel as though that book is not even really mine, that it belongs in many ways to the people of Mexico and to the indigenous people who wrote the sources. I feel that it belongs to all the people who ever taught me, my language teachers and others. It belongs to Rutgers University that nurtures me and pays me to teach young people and to write. It belongs to Oxford University Press that published it and helped me rewrite the parts that were no good, that could not be understood. And now I suppose it also belongs to the Kundil organization that has brought it to the world's attention, brought these stories to the world's attention. I still cannot believe it. I would think that I had heard wrong, except that nobody is muting me or telling me to stop. It is quite extraordinary. I think perhaps to experience this now in the midst of COVID is even more extraordinary in the sense that here I am talking to my computer screen, and yet you tell me as a group, as a world, that this is true. It becomes difficult to believe. I don't know. I really wish that Chimalpahin, the greatest of the Mexican historians, could have known this, because it is really his work as much as mine. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Camilla. Thank you very much, Camilla. So happy that we were able to share in this celebration of all the books, and especially yours. So on behalf of McGill University, congratulations to Professor Camilla Townsend, the Distinguished Professor of History at Rutgers University. I'm so proud of you for this wonderful achievement, and especially in the company of such an extraordinary group of finalists. Your book, which is such a dramatic and personal history of the Aztec people, resonates not only with the jurors, but with historians and history audiences far and wide, which is the goal of the Cundill History Prize. So félicitations, felicidades, and thank you very much for your inspiring speech.
Thank you for your kindness.
Yes, 2020 was never going to be an ordinary year for the Cundill History Prize. And we started, as Peter Frankopan said, navigating this pandemic, we felt perhaps even more strongly than ever how important a function this kind of a prize has in bringing all of us together, the very best historians the very best history writing, and to all of us readers across the world as guidance, as perspective, and most importantly, as a grounding in historical fact, when so much is in confusing and constant shift. We need voices like yours. We need voices like yours, Camilla Townsend. We need voices like yours, Vincent Brown, and William Dalrymple as well. Thank you all so much for being a part of this event, and more importantly, being part of the Cundill History Prize. And I'd like to also use this moment to express my deep gratitude to our 2020 jurors who have shown such great patience and availability and precious use of their time in such a situation. Anne Applebaum, Lyse Doucet, Eliga Gould, and Sujit Sivasundaram. All of you, under the guidance of course, the able capabilities of Peter Frankopan, have brought this, literally this prize to life in a virtual year. And of course, I'm just disappointed that I haven't been able to welcome all of you and the finalists as well to Montreal, but I hope that we can do so in the future at McGill University. So to close off our celebrations, we're delighted to bring you a short winner interview, a wonderful opportunity for all of us to start diving a little deeper into the fantastic work of history that is Fifth Son by Camilla Townsend. Over to you, Dan and Camilla.
Good to see you again.
Great to see you.
Congratulations. It's such an impressive book. This. How do you describe this book to people who have just come across it for the first time?
Well, this is a book about the history of the people that we now call the Aztecs, though they called themselves something else. They said the Mexica. And it takes them from about 100 years before the Spaniards arrived to about 100 years after. So the Spanish conquest, it's important, it's pivotal, but it's not the be all and end all. It's not the beginning of all things or the end of all things. I think, though, perhaps the most important element of the book is that it is based almost entirely on Nahuatl language or Aztec language sources, and not just writings that they committed to paper, working hand in hand with Spanish friars, but work that they wrote on their own, with their own grandchildren in mind, off the radar screen of the Europeans entirely. I think that's probably what makes it an interesting book.
Well, this is why everyone's talking about your book, because lots of us didn't realize that archive was there. How difficult was it? It must have been a monumental task finding that, translating it, and then basically writing it all up for us to understand.
Well, it isn't so much that we didn't know the sources were there. It's just that they had been used in only very limited ways because they weren't written for us, for you or me or other Western readers. They're a bit difficult to make heads or tails of at first. So scholars have long used sources that were written by Indigenous people, but kind of in tandem with Spaniards. The Spaniards would ask a question and they would answer it. And these are called codices. And we've all read bits and pieces of them in textbooks in high school and university. But what we also knew existed and hadn't used very much are the annals, as we call them. That's our English word, our European word, for a tradition that the Nahuas, or the Aztecs, called the Xupohualli, translates more or less as the yearly accounts. They had a long-standing tradition of gathering together in the evenings and telling the history out loud. Different people would stand up and recite different parts of it so they would get a good holistic view from different angles. They call this the Xupohualli. And after the Spaniards arrived, they taught some of their disciples the Roman alphabet, of course, we know that. But what we hadn't focused on is that often these young boys and men, mostly, very few women and girls involved, would take this alphabet home and ask their elders, their fathers, their grandfathers, to tell the histories that they used to tell. And the young people, using the Roman alphabet, would transcribe these performances. We knew they were there. I was not the one who figured out they were there, not at all. But because they're hard to understand at first, very little had been done with them. For example, you might find a passage in which they recount after a war where all the different young noble women were taken as prisoners, or where they were taken to be sacrificed. And this can go on at great length, giving different names and the villages to which this one or that one was taken. And the first time you read such a thing, you think, ooh, what am I going to do with that? Why are they telling me this in such great detail? It's a bit depressing and it seems rather confusing and frankly irrelevant in the big sweep of things. Well, once you've read enough of them, of passages like that, you begin to realize that what they're doing is conveying to their own listeners how bad the defeat was. If a very high-born young lady is being taken to be a prisoner wife, a concubine in a lowly village, then we know that their defeat was total, devastating. Whereas if an ordinary girl is being taken to be a co-wife in a rather important village, then we can glean that the military outcome was a bit iffy. It wasn't, yes, one side won, but just barely. So you learn to recognize the patterns once you've read enough of them, and then you can piece together what they want to say about their own history, which is sometimes a bit different from what the Europeans want to tell us when they're writing their accounts of things.
So you obviously have sort of donated huge chunks of your life to this area, not only clearly learning the native language, but you've had to immerse yourself in the idiom of it as well in that respect. Is your linguistic skill, was this half the battle? Was this the hardest part of writing this book?
I think you have a point there that the linguistic element probably is half the battle. I started to study this language in the late 90s when I was already a professor, a very young professor, doing other things. In a way, it was to be a lark. I was working on a sort of a kind of a biography of Doña Marina, who is the woman who translated Fernando Cortés. She didn't leave any writings, but I thought it kind of behooved me to expose myself to her language. I wouldn't write about a French princess if I hadn't ever studied a word of French, right? So I went to take this course, and I think in a way, unbeknownst to me at the time, I kind of harbored a bit of a racist attitude. I thought, these people are so different from me that I will never be able to understand their language, no matter how hard I try. And in retrospect, that was silly to be charitable about it. All humans think linguistically in certain basic ways. We all have nouns and verbs, subjects and predicates. And so it shouldn't have surprised me that if I'm good at languages that I would be able to do it. But it did surprise me. It kind of shocked me that I was good at it. And it really inspired me because there is so much that these people wrote in their own language during the 16th century. It's really a way into Native American history and thought and culture. So I pursued it. I pursued it for years, took other courses, studied on my own, traveled, tried to teach other people, because there's nothing like having a student to teach you yourself. And I got better and better. I would say it was only 5 to 10 years ago, somewhere in there, that I got to the point that I can really read it. I mean, I still need a dictionary, but I can pretty much read it now. And my speaking skills are still dreadful, because I'm not a heritage speaker. I'm not an anthropology student. I've never lived in a village for a long period of time speaking it. But I've gotten to where I can really read it. And I think that was essential, because you have to read lots of these things rather easily to begin to get a sense of when they think it's funny or where they think they're going with this point. As you say, it's rather idiomatic, and it was important in terms of getting a sense of what they thought was important about history.
Well, I'm, for one, feeling even more inferior now that this all just began. This actor's work of genius began as a little side hustle, little evening weekend hobby.
Not work of genius, just work of patience. No genius.
I'm very insecure now. As you went through this research and as you were translating and opening up all these sources, is there anything that really surprised you?
I find that when I talk to people who have read the book, very often they will say that what surprised them the most was that the conquest was not the end of the world. That yes, it was destructive. Yes, it was hurtful. But the next day, the next week, the next month, the survivors' lives went on, and they wanted to make sure their lives went on and that their children had a decent way to live. That seems to have surprised people who haven't themselves been through a cataclysmic war. I think we all tend to imagine that it's the end times when such events occur, rather than focusing on human resilience. But perhaps for me, what was most surprising was that it turns out to be entirely untrue that the Aztecs had any kind of love affair with death. Their imagination was not particularly macabre. It's certainly true that their political leaders and their priests by the end of their regime, had realized they could use human sacrifice, which was at the heart of their religious ceremonies, an occasional human sacrifice. The idea of a human being sacrificing their life for the gods was at the heart of their religious ceremony. And they realized they could weaponize it and turn it into a terror tactic by doing this to many people, especially people who refused to join their empire. So that is true, that happened, but it doesn't mean that the Aztecs in general were death-loving people who on some deep gut level sort of feasted on the idea of destruction. Not at all. They had senses of humor. Their artists bemoaned this tactic on the part of the priests. They talked in their songs all the time about wishing that it wasn't so. So I think for me, that element was the most surprising.
And I guess my follow-up question was going to be what areas of our sort of conventional wisdom are conventional, what the received wisdom on Aztec culture and of the experience of conquest. Both of that you've already answered that question really, but do you think that's in your book, that's where you've helped to topple a few shibboleths?
I hope the book topples a few shibboleths. That the descendant communities today deserve to know all that we can know about the complexity of their past. I guess one of the most common misconceptions is that the Aztecs or the Mexica worshipped Hernando Cortés or any of the other white men as gods. We're trying to get that out of the textbooks, but it's still there, that they mistook Cortés for the god Quetzalcoatl, is still out there. That's a story that is based on European sources that were produced at the end of the 16th century. There's no evidence in the earliest Nahuatl language sources that that's what they thought. On the contrary, they thought these were enemies who should be defeated as soon as possible. They were unable to do that. Renaissance Europe's technology rendered it impossible that the Aztec Empire defeat them, but they did not worship them as gods. So I think that's probably the most common misconception that's still out there.
Camilla, I get what I took from reading this wonderful book was the enduring nature of Mexica and Aztec life through the conquest, through equally importantly, perhaps more importantly, the catastrophic disease that accompanied the arrival of the Europeans. Is that what you hope that people will take away?
Yes, I do hope that people will take away a sense of the sheer grit and instinct for survival and savvy strategizing that the Aztecs, the Mexica people showed. They deserve to be known for all the efforts that they made to preserve their sense of self, their people's future, even when the microbes devastated them, even when Spanish military might rendered it so that they would be forced to spend the next several centuries transferring wealth to outsiders. Even then, in a psychological and a cultural sense, they managed to hold on to who they were and teach elements of that to their children. I also hope that people learn that the Mexica, the Aztecs, had a sense of humor. Yes, they could rage and grow angry, but they also laughed. They also were capable of sympathy, empathy, helping other humans, just like all of us people are. I hope we're at the beginning of the end of rendering the Mexica primordial character, as it were, as some sort of inherently savage being. Nothing could be more untrue. And today's living people deserve to know that.
You've reimagined, you've redescribed the Mexica so profoundly in this book. Are there other scholars, are there your colleagues around the world doing the same for other civilization, peoples, periods of our history?
Yes, I think we might be looking at a very exciting period in Native American history in the upcoming generation. A number of scholars, a number of younger people are studying Indigenous language and Indigenous created sources, even writing about the Nahuas, the Aztecs. There's much more work to be done. I know one young woman, for example, who was writing all about the ways in which they understood death and the afterlife, which I just barely touch on in this book. Another writing about humor in their culture, another writing about just the songs and the poetry. So I think there is a great deal more to be done. And perhaps most exciting of all, for the first time, we're getting large numbers of people who are heritage speakers, people coming out of Indigenous villages, communities where indigenous languages are still spoken side by side with Spanish. And they are beginning to go to graduate school in larger numbers than ever before. They will study anything they want to study, but some of them will study the history of their own ancestors. And I think that promises to be a very rich, a rich source of new and wonderful books.
Thank you so much, Camilla, and congratulations again to you and to the other finalists, William Dalrymple and Vincent Brown. Thank you, Dan, also for hosting so wonderfully today, and to HistoryHit for their fantastic support in bringing today's ceremony to you all. I'd like to take just a second to thank all of our 2020 partners who helped us deliver this prize virtually, but wonderfully, and to an ever-growing audience around the world. CBC Ideas, Literary Hub, History Extra, the Literary Review of Canada, and our Canadian retail partner, Indigo. And of course, a very special thanks to the Peter Cundill Foundation, who make this History Prize possible, and to our lead patrons, Mackenzie Investments, via Christopher Boyle, and Ryerson and Michelle Simons, for their continued support in 2020, even in this much changed format. We're so grateful. And for the continued patronage of Kit Van Tuliken, our Mcgill alumni, Wonder Kid, I give also our thanks. And thanks to all of you out there in our virtual audience for joining us today and through this week of our Cundill Festival. Many of you have been with us some time. Some of you are coming to the Cundill History Prize for the first time. And I hope that all of you will stay with us as we continue our journey, championing and celebrating the very best history being written today. So the Cundill History Prize Festival and 2020 winner ceremony may be ending here, but there's still a lot of Cundill content in store. HistoryHit have done in-depth interviews with all 3 finalists, and you can catch their special episode tomorrow at 4 p.m. GMT. And in the UK, BBC Radio 3 Free Thinking has an interview with Camilla Townsend in conversation with Rana Mitter, historian, broadcaster, and twice Cundill juror, as part of the program on Living Through the End of the World. And in Canada, do make sure you catch CBC Ideas tonight at 8 p.m. Eastern Time for a full hour with our winner in conversation with Nala Ayed. And there's so much more to come. Do sign up to our newsletters, follow us on social media. Please visit us on our website for the latest. So now I'd like to send it back to Dan Snow for a final word of goodbye. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Antonia. Thank you, everybody, for watching. From all of us involved with the Cundill History Prize 2020, a good evening to you all, wherever you are in the world, and a huge congratulations to Camilla Townsend, the winner. Thank you, and good night.